Hello, my beautiful co-creators. Lilu here. I'm in California today with an amazing man. I'm very delighted to be with you, Dr. Grof. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for having us in your own home. We're here in the Mill Valley.
Mill Valley, it's called, yes.
Off of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's amazing to be sharing this kind of information. You know, being right now in California and people watching all around the world. That always amazes me.
It's amazing what this new technology can do.
Yeah.
How many people you can reach.
Yeah, and how much this is part also of consciousness and raising consciousness right now around the world. The internet is tremendously helping that. Are you amazed by what's happening right now with all the years of research? I think you've researched for over 50 years. And now you're
it's amazing
something.
to see how, gradually these new ideas are accepted. Although they're so challenging for the old thinking in the academic circles, for the old paradigm.
Yeah.
It's these kinds of major revolutions take time. You know that when Copernicus came with the heliocentric system, it took about 100 years, and the resistance was not just church. A lot of it was from the universities that they just were not able to digest this new idea. And so I think it's relatively fast what this consciousness revolution is doing.
I love that you use the word revolution of consciousness or consciousness revolution.
Well, I actually co-wrote a book. It's a trialogue with Peter Russell and Erwin Laszlo, which is called The Consciousness Revolution.
Uh-huh. And this is happening right now?
I believe so, yes.
What are the signs of such a revolution?
Well, actually, I think we are in a very important crossroad where there are like two major trends. One is where the Western civilization, industrial civilization is going, which is increasingly destructive and self-destructive. And then there is this major awakening happening where more and more people, are opening up to the spiritual dimension that was somehow suppressed and lost during the industrial and scientific revolution 300 years ago.
How did we lose it?
Well, I think that what happened is there were some major discoveries made at that time that were sort of turned into technological innovations that started changing the world. And there was this enormous enthusiasm about what the reason can do. Mm. And you probably know that for some time Notre Dame in Paris was called the Temple of Reason, not Temple of Virgin Mary. So there was this excitement, almost like intoxication with the power of reason. Yeah. And so everything that was not rational was kind of discarded as kind of like embarrassing leftovers, from the Dark Ages or from the childhood of humanity. Now we were sort of civilized people, intellectual people and so on. And I think what happened is that somehow the people who were involved in this didn't realize that not everything that's not rational is irrational. What the mystics bring to the world is not irrational, it's transrational. I've certainly met many mystics in my world, and they're perfectly rational. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they experience certain dimensions of reality that are normally hidden, and they added it to their worldview, or they had to find integration of the traditional worldview and this worldview that comes from these mystical experiences. So I think we are now gradually sort of recovering the spirituality that we lost. Mm. We have still religions. I mean, we have Christianity and Islam and so on, and Judaism, but the organized religions really don't have much spirituality in them.
And it feels like we're all searching right now for this freedom also, like we're breaking free of something, aren't we, right now?
Yeah, I think, there is a major revolution that has been happening since the 60s, I think, in many, many different areas. Mm-hmm. If you take certainly civil liberties, enormous development in the United States from what was happening in the 60s, and now having a, black president and another major contender for presidency, a woman, mm-hmm. Hillary Clinton. And then you have major, certainly sexual revolution that's happening in very positive and not so positive ways. And if you compare the movies from the 50s with the movies from the 90s, there's really nothing that we haven't seen in the movies, whereas in the 50s, like, open-mouthed kiss was a shocking for people.
That's why it became the French kiss.
Yeah. So it's in many different areas. Certainly the freedom of information, that's amazing. It's very difficult now for the totalitarian regimes to control the information. They can still do it to a certain extent, but what you see, for example, how powerful now the new media is in these revolutions happening in the Middle East and so on.
Yeah. Do you think, social media and the people are going to become the leaders and take over governments and other structures that have been there for a long time?
I think they're very powerful tools, but again, tools can be used in different ways. So I'm very curious what the outcome of those revolutions will be. The revolutions themselves seem to be very effective and using the media. Certainly Obama's election, was successful because of the involvement of the social media. There's no question about that.
And how important is this revolution right now on a universal scale?
Well, what is happening, you are asking about what kind of revolution it is. I think I am primarily interested in the part of revolution that involves powerful inner transformation, that involves also what I call holotropic states of consciousness. I use that term for a certain important subgroup of non-ordinary states. It's like the states that the shamans experience as part of their initiatory journey, or the kind of states that they induced in their clients when they work with them. The states that the native cultures used in the rites of passage or some powerful healing ceremonies, the experiences of the initiates in the mysteries of death and rebirth, the experiences of the Buddhists, of the yogis, of the Taoists, of the Kabbalists, of Christian mystics, and so on. So I think this is probably the most powerful tool in this revolution, that many people are involved in spiritual practice. There's quite a number of people involved also in psychedelic experimentation. There are many people undergoing what Christina and I call spiritual emergency. It's a spontaneous spiritual opening. There's tremendous interest in Eastern philosophies and so on. So I believe that this can lead to an inner transformation that would make a big difference in the future of humanity. That we are now on a very dangerous course, that we are destroying somehow what is basis of our life as biological creatures. What we need is clean air, we need clean water, we need clean soil. This should be sort of primary imperatives for the species. And what we see is that economic profit and political concerns and military concerns really are more important in today's world, and we are really destroying the base on which we so critically depend. So what I have seen in people who have done this work with holotropic states in a responsible way, I'm not talking about parties in Berkeley where somebody throws in some sugar cubes laced with LSD into punch, but I'm talking about responsible spiritual quest.
With doctors and on a scientific level.
Whether it uses various non-drug means, what I call the technologies of the sacred, or whether it's responsible use of psychedelics. It can really lead to a very predictable transformation of people. For example, in the breathwork that we're doing, holotropic breathwork, you don't have to teach people ecology when they have what we call transpersonal experiences. They experience oneness with nature, oneness with other species. they experience their fundamental embeddedness in nature. You don't have to teach them ecology. I mean, they learn it on a cellular level from their experiences. Also, you can see the boundaries melting, whether it's racial or gender or political or cultural. And people develop a sense of tolerance and compassion, where they see differences as being exciting and interesting rather than something that is a motive for fighting the groups that are different from yours. And also what you see is opening of spirituality, which is non-denominational. In other words, if we do the holotropic breathwork, we create a context for people to have non-ordinary experiences and provide support for that. But we have no investment whether these experiences will be Christians or Christian or Sufi or Buddhist or Hindu. So the experiences that people have are like the experiences of the mystics. They're kind of all-encompassing, all-inclusive.
Yeah.
It's very different from what you see in organized religions that originally started from transpersonal experiences, from spiritual experiences, mystical experiences. We wouldn't have these religions without the founders or the early disciples and so on, or the prophets having direct spiritual experiences. But when these religions became organized, then in most instances they lose the connection with the spiritual source. And what you see with organized religions is that they unite a certain circle of people who somehow relate to the same kind of images, archetypal images, but they automatically set that group against another group that have chosen another approach. You see, and then you have the situation, we are Christians and, you are pagans and we have to convert you or we are eliminate you. Everybody should be Christian.
Separation.
Or we are Muslims and, you are infidels, or we are Jews and you're Goyim and so on. We are Muslims, you are Hindus. And that's enough to kill each other. And even the differences within a certain creed are enough to kill.
Yeah. Like
there are centuries of fights between Catholics and Protestants and between Shiites and the Sunnis. So that's not very helpful religion. Religion by definition should bind together. Religo means to bind together what was fragmented. And today the religions, they are dividing the world. And that's this, significant reason for people to kill each other now. It's not the whole story, but it certainly is a significant contribution.
Yeah. So how do we get to those state of consciousness, those non-ordinary state of consciousness, though, without taking those psychedelics? You're saying we can do that through breath work as well, and to get to this place of unity.
First of all, there are already powerful spiritual technologies. The Christians had powerful exercises. The Jesus prayer, for example, the hesychasm, or the exercises of Ignatius of Loyola. They're powerful Kabbalistic experiences. There's certainly, yogic, various forms of yogic methods, Buddhist methods, Taoist. So shamanic, people can participate in shamanic rituals. So there are all these technologies that are already available, and psychedelics are just the most powerful and tool that we have to be most careful about using, because the more powerful the tool, the more is the positive potential, but also the greater is the potential.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear here, because there's teenagers, there's people from all different places in their life. You're not saying right now to take LSD to get to a place of unity and consciousness. There's other ways.
See, I have tremendous awe. I've worked for many years with psychedelics and other methods, changing consciousness. I have tremendous awe what these tools can do on both sides. I mean, psychedelics can be extremely healing and transforming if they are properly used. They can also be extremely destructive. I've seen people who, after really, very unskillful use of psychedelics, end up in a psychiatric hospital for for years or decades. So psychedelics are a tool, and the results depend on how you use that tool. So we talk about set and setting.
Yeah.
So I certainly would not recommend doing raves where you end up somewhere in an open space and you know that you're doing something illegal and there's possibility of police coming and there's nobody who has any kind of a sense of reality in there. Everybody's taking something. They don't know what they are taking. That's very, very dangerous. But at the same time, psychedelics have been used for centuries by various cultures in the form of psychedelic plants, for example, in Central America, South America, North America as well, the peyote rituals and so on. And they have been used, at the time when it was legal, they were used very effectively by psychiatrists, by psychologists. So they're a powerful tool, potentially very useful, but the way they're used by the young generation is just not only wasting something that would be potentially useful, but doing something that's very, very risky, very dangerous.
Yeah. But you're saying that we can reach these states of consciousness in another way too than taking those through the breath work, for example, or how can we as individual or people listening to this can start feeling the unity, can open to unity consciousness? How is this possible?
People having very powerful experiences with some of the traditional spiritual techniques. If you go to a Zen Buddhist sesshin, or you go to some kind of a Sufi, Sufi Zikr. Those are very powerful techniques. Practicing yoga, practicing different forms of Buddhism. Certainly, we have also powerful methods that were developed as part of first humanistic psychology and then transpersonal psychology. And certainly the breath work that we developed, or reversing, or some other forms of work with breath, they have the potential to open these areas.
Yeah.
But I think what we need, first of all, is the recognition that these experiences are useful. You see, what happened is that current psychiatry pathologizes these states. So we don't have a category in psychiatry that would be mystical experience, spiritual experience. So when people have these experiences, and many people have them spontaneously, they don't have to do anything for it, they don't ask for it, they might even be fighting it, and they happen anyway. But when that happens, current psychiatry doesn't discriminate. This is psychotic experience, this is a mystical experience. We have met many people who had experiences that would be perfectly normal, very valuable in some other cultural context, and in the Western civilization, people get diagnosed if they are put on tranquilizers, and they get a diagnosis that actually is a diagnosis for life. Even if people have one episode like that, and they don't have any other for the rest of their lives, they would be called psychotics in remission. So just the potential of having that kind of experience is considered pathological. And from our perspective, this is an absolutely normal potential that we all have to experience transpersonal experiences. And I believe that the need to have transpersonal experience is the most powerful driving force in the human psyche, more powerful than sex, which as Freud saw it. And if that need is not fulfilled, then it leads to various forms of pathology.
So by not having those experiences right now in our society, that's how we came to this place, really, where we're at right now.
Well, we have lost. I think we have lost really meaningful, experiential spirituality in this culture.
Yeah.
We have religion, but that has the problems that I described. Religions are not very, by and large, not very helpful in the situation,
science either.
In the crisis that we're in.
Science either. Western science needs a whole paradigm shift.
We need, very, very radical changes of our worldviews.
Yeah.
which has already happened. But it's very interesting that it involves more physicists than psychologists and psychiatrists. When I first published some of the observations, from first psychedelic research and then from the breathwork, the people who were most receptive were not psychologists and psychiatrists, were modern physicists.
Huh.
And for me, it was extremely important to meet Fritjof Capra, because I was part of a small group that was working on these foundations of transpersonal psychology with Abraham Maslow and Tony Suttage and Sonia Margulies and Jim Fadiman, Miles Vick and so on. And we felt that this psychology made a lot of sense. You see, it didn't make schizophrenics out of every shaman or founder of religion. It was very culturally sensitive. It didn't pathologize ritual and spiritual practice the way current psychiatry does. So we were very satisfied. We thought it made sense. The transpersonal psychology also incorporated all these observations from consciousness research, from psychedelic therapy, from mystical experiences and so on. But we had no idea how that new psychology could be connected to what we knew as science. There was such a deep gap. And even if the psychology made sense in and of itself, it was very vulnerable to be called unscientific, irrational, because it was challenging some of the most fundamental metaphysical assumptions of Western science. And for me, it was extremely important to meet Fritjof Capra just after he published the Tao of Physics. We had a party. Francis Vaughan had a party here in Tiburon, and Fritjof Capra came and was meeting people from the transpersonal circles. And I had finished reading the Tao of Physics, and I knew that was the way. What Fritjof was showing is that the medicine, biology, psychiatry, psychology, the way we know them, are actually based on 17th century thinking, what he called the Cartesian Newtonian paradigm. And what happened since the turn of the 19th and 20th century, after the discovery of radioactivity and X-rays and so on, was major revolution, particularly in the first 3 decades of 20th century, when the whole Cartesian Newtonian framework collapsed, and physicists themselves moved to these extremely revolutionary realms, quantum relativistic physics. Now what happened is that the other disciplines that models themselves after physics in the 17th century did not really follow. They're still stuck in the 17th century. And so as a result of it now, the modern physicists who have this sort of quantum relativistic thinking, they're very open to what transpersonal psychology is bringing. So the new gap is not between, science and spirituality, but the gap is between the old thinking, the old worldview, and the new worldview. And the old worldview seems incompatible with transpersonal psychology, whereas everything that comes from the new paradigm is always welcome. It's always sort of challenging somehow the old thinking in different scientific disciplines, but it's always embraced by the transpersonal circles as a kind of a new piece into the mosaic of the new worldview, within which transpersonal psychology and consciousness research would be just an integral part of this new worldview.
So Taz, there's also one thing that I would like to hear from you is your relationship to time, because there's, as you said earlier, there's kind of some kind of emergency, for those changes, those paradigm shifts to happen now. What is your relationship to time, or how do you see it, and how much time do we have, and how can we transform our relationship to time? Because it seems to be really important piece right now for people to hear.
I wish I knew how much time we have. That's That's the $64,000 question. Yeah. I think we are involved in a race, and many people see it that way. Particularly when they really have some deep insights in these non-ordinary states. That we are in a race where the question is, we continue doing what we have been doing, we might not make it as a species, or we might take a few species with us. And the alternative is if somehow this inner transformation would happen, we can move, to a level which is unprecedented, a sort of new evolutionary level where problems that seem completely insoluble now would be easily solved. I mean, if we had our heads and hearts in the right place, we would not have to have hunger in the world, or we would not have problems of pollution and so on. We already know what the alternatives would be, but there are major forces which are standing in the way of the transformation. I hope that, for example, when 9/11 happened, that the response would be like a Manhattan Project for solar energy. Let's put all the best intellects and all the resources into development of clean energies and create energy independence that would solve the political problems, so that we don't really depend critically on what's happening in the Middle East.
Yeah.
The United States really has no business in the Middle East. Wouldn't be there except for the oil. So if this country could be independent, if we had independent sources of energy, it would solve both the ecological problems but also the political problems. And the response was very different. It was not, let's go for solar energy. Let's have let's have energy independence. Kind of an old-fashioned.
So how can we be then in life? How can we relate to time? How can we be ourselves in front of those catastrophic sometimes event, or some of those things that bring up fear, deep fear in us, and then that makes us not do the right or take the right decisions?
Well, I think what happens that each of us is looking at the situation in the world, and it seems overwhelming. Like, who am I to change the situation? Now, if you start thinking in a different way, that you start from yourself, that everybody sort of looks inside and experiencing the inner transformation. In our experience, it becomes kind of contagious. It sort of moves. Rupert Sheldrake has the idea of the morphogenetic field, and so besides what's happening in the social media and so on, that people actually connect with each other, there could be also a lot of things happening in separate places where individual people do inner work, and you transform or contribute to the transformation that way. Now, we don't have really scientific proof of that, but there's a belief, for example, in India, that it's possible for the yogis who live in the Himalayas in a cave and hardly ever come out, that they actually get into states of consciousness that can influence the world situation. There were scientific experiments here with transcendental meditation, that they were showing that you can influence the criminality in a city by group meditations and so on.
Pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah. So, we need a new paradigm.
Yeah.
And it's not that we have to create it from scratch. I mean, the elements are already here, but there is just a major resistance from the traditional academic circles that they hear about these experiences that we are talking about. They just don't believe that they exist, or they think it's psychotic. It's sort of pathological, and not something that they have to pay attention to. So it's a major paradigm shift, and it takes time. And I think the crucial element would be the media. Once this kind of a new information would be disseminated by the media, that would just tremendously accelerate this.
And by us too, through those videos like what we're doing right now and them being shared online, one person shares it with another, and then to another. It goes very, very fast. It's in our own hands as individuals too. That's part of this inner work, isn't it?
Yeah, but for this kind of transformation to happen, it's not enough to disseminate the information. It's really important, but ultimately people have to do the inner work.
Yeah.
People.
So how do you define
So
inner work?
ultimately, it
Just
has to somehow inspire people.
Yeah.
To
then
get
do the work
involved in
themselves
some kind of
yeah.
activity that leads to transformation. Because usually we look at the situation and we believe that there's nothing wrong with us. It's sort of all the other people. But if you do the inner work, you discover that we all carry the shadow that Jung was talking about. And that, in some maybe not very obvious and more subtle ways, that we all contribute to what is happening. And
so what is happening right now is what's also happening in here. It's a mirror. What we have in our reality, what we live in our reality, what we're seeing in the world.
I think what is happening is a projection of these areas that we are not looking at. For example, when somebody would go through what we call the psychospiritual death rebirth experience, which is one of the major patterns of that transformation, it seems to involve looking at your own biological birth and dealing with the emotions and physical energies that are still stored in the unconscious psyche and are influencing how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the world, what you think should be your behavior, and so on. And there's a distortion. There's a sort of a certain unhealthy element, in our lives. In some people, it's more significant than in others, depending how much of that material is in the psyche and how close it is to consciousness. But if we do it, if we do this inner work, that psychospiritual process of death and rebirth has certain stages. I talk about it as basic perinatal matrices. And that the first matrix would be related to the situation where we are still in the womb. Mm-hmm. The second matrix would be now when the uterus closes and we are in this kind of a no-exit situation. And then the third matrix is the actual struggle through the birth canal to come out. And then the fourth matrix is coming out. Now, if you look at the third matrix, it has sort of a certain experiential qualities. For example, there is a lot of aggressive imagery that emerges, images of wars and fights and struggles and so on. There's a lot of sexual images, so a kind of it's not Romeo and Juliet, kind of. It's very, very
hard,
problematic sort of images that have to do with sexual violence, sexual aberrations, with red light districts, and so on. Situations where people use the other partner, for their own satisfaction without any kind of emotional connection, and so on. There is a situation where we encounter this biological material, I call it a scatological. Scatos means like dung or excrement and so on. So there is that stage as we are coming out and we are sort of covered by all that stuff. Now there are certain elements in this that we see now actually enacted in the world. For example, you see a tremendous unleashing of aggression now. The world is becoming more and more dangerous. The terrorist movement and so on. And if you look at the American cities, they are sort of becoming increasingly less safe with all the drug traffic happening and so on. Now, if you do it internally, you would experience this sort of unleashing of these aggressive images, but you would not be hurting anybody. You would be just processing it. You would be purging it out. You would be cleansing that. At the same time, you would experience a lot of sexual imagery again, and again, this would be part of the purging. Now we see it also happening in the world. I mentioned, if you compare the 50s and the 90s, and you know, the kinds of things happening in San Francisco in the underworld and so on. It's quite amazing. So there is this unleashing of this repressed sexual impulse. Then we also see this pollution, this sort of scatological element happening in the world. If you look at all the industrial dumps and so on, and all the problems that we have in that. So you see, the kind of elements that we would confront internally if we get involved in this inner transformation, we are actually projecting. We are sort of releasing all those energies in the world. And you know, the end, if you internalize, the end would be death, rebirth.
Yeah.
If you project it out, the end product is destruction without the you know, spiritual opening. So this is how many people see it, that we are sort of in this race, or is it going to go one way when we are just going to really destroy our world because of all these unresolved drives that we have, or are we going to be able to look at them and to bring them into full consciousness and integrate them? And are we going to? It's almost like turning into another species.
Yeah.
You know, people whom I have seen really successfully completing this kind of process, they seem to be like members of a different species, or it's like, well, they're coming from Star Trek, you know, from the value system of the Galactic Federation there in Star Trek. Like, you know, these people have this idea that they feel like they're planetary citizens before they are members of any particular country, that we should have a global constitution where protection of life and environment is primary because we are biological creatures, where aggression is not an acceptable form of solving problems, you know. So people develop these kinds of values, and if we had species composed of those kinds of individuals, we would have certainly a much better chance for survival. You know, one of the basic things that people realize in this kind of work is that the planet is a closed system. So what we are doing is that turning non-renewable resources, the fossil fuels, into pollution is a one-way street. Whereas the way nature was operating before, everything was being recycled. Everything that was created was also destroyed and became the building material for something else. So people who have a decent insight into these cosmic cycles and so on, they would never get involved in activities which are this sort of linear, one-sided. You know, you're increasing the pollution of air, of you know, all the industrial products. Some time ago I listened to an interview of a woman who was an ecologist, and she mentioned this, just part of the things that they discovered in the Pacific Ocean, an island of floating plastic of the size of Texas.
Really?
So, you know, if we continue doing this kind of thing, it would not take a very long time. You see in some of the cities, Mexico City, San Paulo, Tokyo, to some extent in Los Angeles, you see what the world would look like if we continue doing what we are doing. And I think unless there is some kind of really deep change in people's consciousness and change of their value system and priorities, you know, we don't have much chance of making it.
Do you believe in lives outside this planet, in extraterrestrial lives?
I don't know. I had the experiences, and many other people had the experiences. You know, in our training, the breathwork training for practitioners was John Mack, who has done some significant work with the people who experience the alien abduction experiences, and he was on all the talk shows and wrote books about it, like abductions, and one was called the Passport to the Universe and so on. So it's a very real phenomenon. I mean, we can, encounter these supposed visitors from other worlds.
Or supporters? Are they supporters?
Yeah, well,
of what's happening right now?
I think that the most likely explanation for that is that those are manifestations from the collective unconscious. Carl Gustav Jung wrote a book about it on the UFOs, and this was his perspective. Many of them have sort of certain characteristics of the kind of figures that you find in the mythologies of different cultures and so on. So part of it could be seen as just a mythology for our time, but the experiences are very real, and they have what Jung called psychoid quality, because sometimes, first of all, it can involve more than one person. There's a consensual validation that they all agree that they have experienced or seen something. And the other thing is that it's frequently connected with events in the physical world. There was a situation where there was a Japanese 747 flying over Alaska, and they all saw the passengers saw a spaceship, and the trained crew, saw a spaceship following them, and the radar on the ground registered two objects, and then it was a sensational situation, headlines, and when the radar operator saw it, he sort of, denounced it. He says, well, he really checked the record, and on careful scrutiny, that second point was just an artifact. Only that one thing was here. But what's this interesting synchronicity between what they all saw on that plane, and what was appearing on the radar. Or sometimes people see, this flying saucer landing, and they go there in the morning, and there is a burned circle there. So there are these kinds of strange synchronicities. For me, the most moving evidence was John Mack traveled to Africa when there was a report about a school of African children, a teacher and a class saw flying saucer. He interviewed them quite independently and made a video about it. And they were certainly not children who were influenced, by our own news here, media, and so on. And it was seemed so honest and so real what they were talking about.
Yeah. So we may not be the most intelligent thing in this entire universe.
Well, I don't know what it is. I just know it's cannot be dismissed as some kind of misinterpretation of some meteorological phenomena, or that these people hallucinate, they're crazy. I mean,
it's time to bring it up.
It's too simple. It's a phenomenon for which we don't have any kind of explanation. And John Mack, who actually he is dead, he was hit by a drunk truck driver in London when he was crossing the street. But he started, as a result of it, he started something called PEER, which was an organization studying anomalous phenomena that current science has no explanation for. And this phenomenon certainly would belong there. So, it's very baffling for us. I'm great aficionado of these books of modern physics, and Michio Kaku is a very, very interesting writer, and he writes about hyperspace and the possibility of visitations from other planets, or traveling to other planets and so on. And it's a very, very fascinating material. But if they were coming, if they were real visitors, they would have to have technology that we hardly can imagine, or maybe we have some intimation of what would have to happen. The distances are such that they would have to enter into hyperspace and re-enter, or reaching velocity exceeding speed of light.
But that must intrigued you as a scientist to.
Well, I know it's experientially it's real. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, many people had in the breathwork had the experiences, in psychedelic sessions. I have had.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called "When the Impossible Happens."
Oh,
which-
yes. Yeah.
Which where all the stories are stories of
Uh-huh.
describing events that should not be possible if the monistic materialistic science were right in terms of describing the world. And I describe some of my own experiences of the extraterrestrial intelligence. So, where it's coming from, I don't know. It's a very real phenomenon.
Yeah. And I love what you say, and this is really, I know we spend a great amount of time with you here, and it's such a delight, to share all this information right now with everybody. And I just love, it's so great to hear all this, and we need to hear all this right now. And we are evolving as a new species. We're ourselves, our DNA is transforming, our capacities are increasing, our telepathy is increasing, and it seems like the internet too is a big part of that in helping us to communicate in new ways, and new things are possible. Everything is possible these days, isn't it? And very fast. The impossible is possible.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, these new technologies started approaching or mimicking psychic phenomena. Now you can sort of see what's happening anywhere in the world, when you have a satellite. And when we were in Big Sur, we couldn't get a signal there, the regular signal, so we had the satellite dish. And so besides the ordinary channels, we also get the feeding channels, where these different stations have people in different parts of the world. And when things are happening, they are sort of filming it and they sending it to their stations. So you can see in real time what was happening in India or Pakistan or in the Middle East and so on. Or you have cell phone, you can communicate. Before the idea was that the psychics can do it. Psychics can sort of connect with somebody, the other part of the world. Or you can see now in your iPhone, you can see any part of the world. You just ask for what you want to see, and it comes, and then you can sort of amplify it to the point. I mean, you can find our house, for example, and you can see in that way any place on the planet. Before there were some reports about remote viewing, some of the experiences that were done at Stanford Institute, where there were people like Ingo Swann who were able to sort of tune into it psychically and then describe a place somewhere on the surface of the planet. Now anybody can do it, with these.
And soon we might not even need these anymore.
Well, that's
maybe it's preparing us. That's what you're saying, right? That maybe it's preparing us for another way of communicating without those devices and without.
Well, there is there's certainly that trend, because there are situations like certainly near-death situations, certainly these abduction experiences, but also people who have just psychedelic experiences. So the holotropic experiences, the level of intuition increases, the incidence of ESP phenomena. So we certainly have that capacity, And we knew Anne Armstrong, who was a phenomenal psychic. She used to come to our months-long workshops at SLN. And she was actually teaching the groups how to cultivate their own ESP, The idea was that everybody has that capacity, and it can be like anything else, it can be cultivated. And she believed that our culture actually kills it in children, that children come with that capacity, but because of our disbelief, that this is possible, that we just sort of discourage children from going in that direction. And if there were sort of more openness and more encouragement and even award, for people who have now psychic phenomena, they have a better chance of getting a diagnosis than being rewarded in any way or appreciated for that.
I know there's your little granddaughters here. Are you surprised by their capacity, their gifts, them coming in the world? Are they different? Are you moved by them? I guess beyond just being part of your family, but really who they are as individuals of this planet.
They are amazing. I think part of it is the type of birth that they had. Our daughter Sarah and her husband Forrest, they did a home birth. They just had a little, hot tub it's not hot, it's a warm tub, with a thermostat, and they did everything at home. They had a midwife. The midwife didn't come until the contractions were like maybe 4 minutes from each other. They did it all together. We were actually invited to this last birth. We were Christine and I were there, kind of holding the space, and so just that this type of birth, unhurried, no bright lights and so on, and
no machines beeping.
Yeah, a lot of a loving environment that certainly would make a big difference. I believe that, as I mentioned, that the birth trauma plays really a major role in our unconscious, in that part that Jung called shadow, that we carry a lot of difficult emotions and undigested sort of physical energies, unreleased physical energies. And that how we conduct birth really makes tremendous difference in people's future lives. And also the postnatal care, certainly the nursing and all those things make a big difference.
And they also come, you think, with higher vibration or just a bigger capacity to be telepathic, or it seems like it's a new kind of children too being born, beyond just the birthing way.
Well, it's also, I believe that for the indication that we have from people reliving the prenatal state and so on, that in the prenatal state there is connection to the whole, to cosmic consciousness, to the larger matrix, to the transpersonal realm. And if you have easier birth, if it's handled better, then part of you sort of remains connected there. Whereas if it's a very kind of a brutal, traumatic experience, it kind of tends to cut you. Igor Tchaikovsky believed that by making the birth easier, that it provides like a channel for incarnation of some higher beings, higher consciousness. But then he himself sort of went a little overboard, and I think people like Michel Audin, have adapted this method and doing it in a saner way than Igor Tchaikovsky. One of the things Igor Tchaikovsky did, he bound the hands of the children behind their back and let them swim. They had to swim like long distances and so on. And also dunking them in freezing water. He wanted to create a kind of a higher species.
Wow.
But I think that element of underwater birth is a very, very interesting and very healthy kind of phenomenon.
So are you at a place of excitement right now for where are you at in your life, for what's going on and what's happening, and just in general?
Well, I think it's an extremely interesting time to be alive, and you can see that this period that we are experiencing now is very unique. I mean, there were sort of ideas about the end of the world, but it was never a real possibility. It would have to be some really major, either cosmic catastrophe or some kind of a supernatural intervention. But now we are in a situation where we really can either have a completely different humanity and a completely different planet, or we might really destroy ourselves. I mean, there's some of the major things, which is like the nuclear weapons and so on, but then you have the industrial pollution and all kinds of other things that are probably more subtle, the things that we put in our food and so on, how it's going to influence heredity, how it's going to influence incidence of some diseases. There's some studies showing that maybe brain cancer might have something to do with the use of cell phones. That increases the vibrations that we are exposing ourselves to.
That's going to be big scandals in the future, aren't they? Those cell phones. It is huge. The information is not being shared again on that level.
Well, the idea is that we created this just enormous amount of electromagnetic vibrations of various kinds, all the powerful television stations, radio stations, and then all that's happening with the cell phones and so on. Biology is not equipped for this, so we don't know what kind of impact this is going to have.
Yeah. But this is everything happens and is perfectly timed, and all is well for us to birth something new right now in this new species. So
I think if we
let's stay on the positive note.
Yeah, if we could, if we could go through this powerful inner transformation, I think many of these problems would seem to be easy. Mm-hmm. Whereas now it's like walking through molasses if you want to achieve some kind of an improvement. I would have a lot of hope for humanity that would be composed of the kind of people that I have seen, really changing internally, moving to a very different way of being and developing a different kind of system of values and different life strategy.
Who is a person that we all know in like public domain that would incarnate those values right now, that you admire and that you recognize and that you're like, this is a great example?
Well, there's I don't know that it would be somebody whom I have seen going through that process, but certainly I admire very much His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I admire very much Václav Havel, the ex-president of Czechoslovakia, whom I had a chance to meet personally. So there are people like that. Certainly Mandela is a person in that category. So if we had statesmen, of that kind of quality, I think things could happen. Mm-hmm. But I've seen, what I'm talking about is ordinary people who've been in our training, and I've seen them, really changing dramatically their way of being and looking at the world. And
what an inspiring life you have! What a juicy life! This is what the Juicy Living Tour is about.
What is?
This is what the Juicy Living Tour is all about. You have a juicy life, seeing those transformations, and seeing people rebirth and changing their lives is amazing.
I think we have had very interesting life.
Yeah.
Both Christina and myself, not always easy, but certainly very
fulfilling in the heart.
Yeah, I think I would not trade it easily. Thank you again.
Well,
thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for this moment. It's been very, very great. Thank you. Actually, my beautiful co-creators, this was an awesome interview with Dr. Grof. Thank you so much. If you want to see more interviews, you can go on juicylivingtour.com. Bye-bye.